The Seven Secrets of Somewhere Lake by Sam Campbell. Chapter 16. Through the Ages on a Mule. I awakened at dawn hoping it would all prove to be a dream, but it wasn't. We were actually going on the mule trip into the canyon. That which I had most feared had come upon me, like Job of old. We arrived at the corral at the appointed hour. The men were already on hand and had the mules organized. Jack was there, whistling merrily, beaming with happiness over my demise. He introduced us to our guide, a tall boy named Pete, of mixed Mexican and American ancestry. Going into the canyon via mule-mobile was commonplace with him, and he was calloused beyond all enthusiasm and cordiality. "This is your mule, Jenny," Jack said, leading up a moderate-sized critter with a gray hide and stubborn face. "His name is Jeff. Just call him by name, tell him what you want him to do, and if he wants to, he'll do it. That is, I guess he would, but he has never wanted to do anything he was told so far." Jeff said, "Jeff and I will get along all right," said Jenny, patting the tough sides of the creature. "And is this mine? Is this Z-Bar?" I asked, pointing to another mule of about the same size that stood saddled. "Oh, no, no," Jack replied emphatically. "That is Rosie. Pete will ride her. Here comes Z-Bar now. You can always identify him by the Z and a bar branded on his flank." I looked towards the gate through which Z-Bar was entering, led by a cowboy. One glance and I knew I would never need to look at that mule's flanks in order to identify him. I never saw such an animal before. I didn't see how they got him all in one hide. "Jack," I exclaimed, "are you sure that is just one mule?" Jack nodded and laughed. "Z-Bar is lots of mule, he commented as he tightened up the cinch strap on Jeff. "Are you sure it is a mule?" I asked in amusement. "If he had a trunk, he would make a wonderful elephant." Z-Bar looked about the size and somewhat the shape of a grand piano. Already my knees and ankles began to ache as I thought of shaping my legs around his bulging sides. Ginny was in her saddle now, looking annoyingly happy. Then I got aboard Z-Bar. I never have found out just how this was accomplished. I walked up to the huge animal in sort of a daze. I found the stirrup dangling somewhere in the region of my nose. There was no rope ladder, no elevator, and Z-Bar seemed not in the least inclined to kneel down as a camel might do, so I stood there helpless. Then the boys of the crowd closed in on me. Jack came up on my right side, looking energetic and powerful. Peter came up on the other, rolling up his sleeves. Three Indian boys walked up behind me, and there were at least two others, though I did not get a good look at them. They all took hold of me, and I had the sensation of being tossed in a blanket. While my senses steadied again, I found I was sitting astride of Z-Bar, and I had learned to do the splits in one lesson. My legs were sticking straight out at the sides, toes pointed forward like those hooks that they have on mail cars. Even Z-Bar looked around incredulously and then turned loose an insulting strain of mule derivations. As to my sensations, no doubt they were something akin to those suffered on the racks of the Inquisition. I learned to admire the self-control of both Pete and Jack during those few moments. They must have wanted to laugh, but they didn't. Both of them backed up a little, holding their chins and looking at me as if they couldn't believe the testimony of their eyes. Jack was beside Z-Bar now, having regained his composure, and he said, "Mr. Campbell, you know that your feet ought to be in those stirrups, don't you?" I tilted over to one side and looked down at a stirrup. There were fully 2 feet between the position of my foot held out in the air and the thing in which it was supposed to reside. I just looked at Jack helplessly and shook my head. "Oh, you can do it," he said with a typical Western confidence. "Here, I'll help you." Taking hold of my leg with his great big hands, he bent it around the sausage-like contour of Z-Bar and forced my toe into the stirrup. Pete caught the atrocious ideal and performed a light contortion on the other leg. There I sat helplessly handcuffed or foot-cuffed to a mule. Jenny and Jeff started to walk away, but I called to her, "Don't leave me now. If no one helps me off this thing, I'll be here for the rest of my natural life." Jack seemed well satisfied at seeing me in this helpless position, and he gave the word for us to start our journey down. Pete mounted his mule Rosie, and we were off. From the corral, it is only a short distance to the rim of the canyon, where the trail turns abruptly down. No words could ever describe my feelings when we began this steep descent. I could look right between Z-Bar's ears and see the bottom of the canyon nearly a mile below. If that mule was had been equipped with brakes, I would have burned them out in the first 100 yards. By means of switchbacks, the Kaibab Trail, as it is called, goes down a wall as vertical as the side of a building. I was impressed with the appalling waste of labor in building this trail. It is 8 to 10 feet wide, but the mules only use the outside 6 inches. Z-Bar was passionately fond of flowers, not to see, but to eat. Whenever he found one growing on the outside of the trail, he would reach out and nip it off, while I held onto the saddle horn until my fingertips were permanently registered thereon. "Before us lies the Grand Canyon of the Colorado River," Pete began a memorized speech prepared for regular tourist trade. Z-Bar let out a snort as much as to say, "Do I have to listen to that again?" "We shall descend over a mile, and there find the great, roaring Colorado awaiting us. Giddy up!" "Lucky river," I commented, my voice gauged for the limit of Z-Bar. "At least it don't have to go down on a mule." We are now passing through the layer of rocks down as the call it, kebab limestone, orated Pete, his voice strengthened by his pride of knowledge. "This rock has, that is, funny doodads in it that look like corals, sponges, and shark's teeth. The layer is 550 feet thick." "Ouch," I groaned. "Only 550 feet down? So there are still nearly 5,000 feet to go?" Z-Bar tossed his head and looked back at me as much as to say, "Listen, brother, don't do all the complaining. Remember, you're no cream puff to carry." Z-Bar was learning some things about me. I could tell by his behavior. Pete had given me certain introductions about handling him. "He's smart," said our guide. "Let him know he can boss you and he'll do it. Use your whip, beat him. He expects that, and you can't hit hard enough to really hurt him." But I couldn't lash that interesting old mule, who hadn't done anything to me. He knew it all right. Presently he wouldn't do anything I asked him to do. In helplessness, I became philosophical about the whole affair. I reached up and got hold of one of Z-Bar's big ears. "Listen, Z-Bar," I said. It's all your show now. You go where you want to, when you want to, and you may be sure I'll come along." Actually, Z-Bar seemed to behave better after that. "This is the Coconino sandstone," lectured Pete. "Notice it is a different color. Step up there, Jeff. Come on, Z-Bar. The grain of this rock looks like wind-blown sand, which was piled up in dunes. What's the matter with you, Rosie?" And sometimes you find, "Rosie!" marks that look like some strange critter's been walking around it. "This layer is 300 feet thick, I think." "That's 850 feet to this point, Z-Bar," I muttered. "Still over 4,000 to go." Now we are entering the Hermit Shale layer, Rosie, Pete jerked the mule's head away from a nibble at some wayside grass. This rock looks like river mud. Contains many impressions of Jeff, you lousy critter, come out here. Ferns, plants, wings, doodads, and stuff. This deposit is 300 feet thick, just like the other. While listening to Pete's running narration, I was watching Z-Bar and the other mules and developing an appreciation of them. They certainly were travel-wise. How carefully they selected their footing. Their steps were so designed and directed that the weight was never put on advancing foot until the mule was sure that it was well placed. When Pete occasionally declared a rest period, the mule would turn crosswise on the trail, head to the outside for greater safety and comfort. Now we are entering the Supia formation, about 8 foot thick, droned Pete, mixing in some cowboy words with memorized lines and launching them out, oratorical gestures that made Rosie toss her head. 800 feet thick. Rosie, plague, take your thick hide. You got me all muddled up. It is sandstone, limestone, and shell, and has a lot of funny stuff and marks in it. Note, he pointed dramatically, the difference in the color of the rocks we have come through. They got something in them that does that. At the lower edge of the Supia formation, we are 2,000 foot below the rim. Z-Bar, I whispered. I believe I'm going to make it. Ouch! Don't do that again, or you are going to finish this alone. Z-Bar had slipped, jolting me and sending a pain from the tip of my big toe to the roots of my hair. Mixing mule gripping with scientific dissertation, Pete talked all the way to the bottom of the first descent. While we passed through the famous switchbacks of the Red Wall, a deposit of red limestone 500 feet thick, he had trouble with Z-Bar. Z-Bar had found some sort of shrub that suited his palate, and all the jerking, pulling, and pleading I could do didn't make him budge. Pete called to him, but no response. Then Pete rode back past Jenny and her Jeff, intent on giving Z-Bar a sound lacing. Z-Bar watched him coming and continued eating until Pete was within a few feet. Then he voluntarily ceased his lunch and walked on. Pete was entirely defeated. He couldn't whip Z-Bar then, so he contented himself with telling the mule some most uncomplimentary things about himself. Z-Bar put his ears back so he couldn't hear and walked on. Down and down we went through the clearly marked layers of mauve limestone, bright angel shell, and tepid sandstone. We paused to rest the mules in view of the impressive roaring springs, where a gushing waterfall comes spurting right out of the rocky side of the canyon, the waters forming the famous Bright Angel Creek, so often mentioned in the early history of the region. At noon, we stopped for lunch at Ribbon Falls. Here, one lone cottonwood tree offered some shelter from the blazing sun. Heat is a part of the traveler's difficulty in the Grand Canyon. It is desert country down there, and the sun beats down unmercifully. Our steep descent was now over. There was a long ride ahead of us, but it was relatively level travel. We went through Bright Angel Canyon, crossing and recrossing the clear water stream. The course of the Bright Angel Creek follows a great crack thought to be created by an earthquake long, long ago. As the day was coming to a close, we neared Phantom Ranch, the end of our journey. We have now reached the bottom of the canyon, orated Pete, putting a poetic finale on his narration. Half-mile on is the Colorado, singing its ancient song. It sang there before Columbus discovered America. It sang before cannibals crossed the Alps. It sang, needles must have struck in a groove, I whispered to Z-Bar. I feel as if I have been in the saddle longer than that. Z-Bar shook his head as if to say, me too. Pete's concluding lines were lost in giggles which Jenny could not control. We shall not forget our reception at Phantom Ranch. Jack Burns was right. These were mighty fine folks. They came out to meet us, reaching up to shake hands and making us feel important and welcome. Then they helped us off our mules. At least, they told me I was off the mule. I could hardly believe it, for I felt just the same as I had on Z-Bar's back. My legs restrained their new-found shapes, and I looked like the first arch on a croquet set. Mostly under the influence of his own oratory, Pete had warmed up to us now. He seemed actually solicitous. "Mr. Campbell," he said as I stood there trying to convince myself that I was actually standing on the ground, "I would suggest that you don't try to walk right away." "Pete," I returned, "put your mind at rest. I couldn't take a step if you pushed me. You go on and do all your chores, and when you want to find me, I'll be standing right here." Jenny was moving around, making the marvelous discovery that she could still walk. Finally, a shower bath and a swim in the pool formed of waters of Bright Angel Creek helped bring us back to normal. We were quartered in a lovely little cabin where we could see the south rim of the Grand Canyon towering over us, and hear the endless song of Angel Creek as it made its way to the Colorado River, a half-mile beyond. Presently the dinner bell rang. Such wonderful food, served in such a hospitable way. We felt as if we had known these people always and were guests in their home. It was one of the grandest meals I have ever had sat down to, and the marvel was that I could.